Hey everyone, welcome back to Dan91's Garage. This week we'll be finishing the turbo downpipe for the Toyota Starlet. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. See you in a sec.
Well, one thing I've just remembered is I haven't really told you much about the pipes. I mean, just a quick run through it. This obviously is 2¼ inch here on the exhaust, so this flange is obviously 2¼ inch as well to match it. This is a specific reducer I had made. It was custom made on eBay. You just search for like exhaust pipe reducer and then you put in whatever size you want here and whatever size you want here, and they basically make it for you out of mild steel. So this is again 2¼ inch to slip inside this flange here, so I can position it in there, and it was easier to sort of position and weld basically, and with a bit of tape it kind of holds itself there, which is good when you're doing this all on your own. The other side of this was the internal of it was 2½ inch, which is what these bends are. So these are bends from Jetex. They're mild steel and they're obviously a tight radius bend. I can't remember if it's 1½ or 1 times diameter for the centerline radius of them, but that's the reason they're made in 2 pieces. So obviously these 2 halves are pressed in a press because they can't bend that. It's too tight a radius and it'll collapse here and won't stretch enough here, so you can't actually bend them this tight without them being horrific. So what they do is they press them in 2 halves and then weld them together. So we've got 2 90s, a 77½ because I've cut it down, and a special reducer at the bottom. But the reducer in this plate came from the same company, and they were really good. They were top quality stuff. And these Jetex ones, they're all right. Like I say, the welds are a bit ugly, and they are, because they're mild steel. Frustratingly, they were already rusty when they got here. But so yeah, the last thing we've got to do here is cut ourselves a piece of straight pipe. Again, 2½ inch. Little ring section to drop in here. So I'll have a quick measure up of that. I believe it was 33mm. We'll go chop it on the big saw. Okay, so it's the final ring piece, I guess. Let's see if we got our sums right. It was 36mm in the end, top to bottom. So yeah, not too bad. It actually cut really nice. It's actually good steel. This is real nice steel, this Jetex stuff. It's anyway. Oh, so far so good. And just for the fun of it, let's make sure we try and line our seams up, otherwise that would look stupid. So yeah, I'll say that was pretty good. So I think I'll tack that one to the bottom, 90, because we might still need to shorten this up once we've tacked the 77½ to this 90. Let's have a little tour underneath as well while we're here. Looks like we might have to shorten up this straight bit here on the reducer just a smidge. But yeah, certainly the thickness of that collar is now fine, so we're not going to change that anymore. It's just a case of a tiny tweak on this, I think, and then we'll be there. I'm over the moon with that. Okie doke, so I've welded the straight section onto the 90, and I also welded the reducer onto the other end of it. So I've tacked the top 2 pipes together as well, because the tape on there was obviously starting to shift and stuff, and now the bottom one's fixed. It's time to make the top one a bit more permanent. I also shortened this down so it now only sticks halfway into this flange, because that's where I'm going to weld it inside and outside anyway, because I can't get a full weld on the outside with the bolts. And then I've put a piece of tape on here that's about sort of 4 or 5mm, which gives me my depth there, so that's cool. So if we slip that in there, and then I've already marked it up a bit, as you can see. Yep, so what I'm going to do now is I'll put some tape around this joint to hold it together, go and tack it on the bench, and then come back and feed the pipe back in so I can make sure it drops into the 2 flanges like it should. And then we'll be ready to weld it. So carry on with that. There it is, all welded up. I'm pretty happy with my efforts, considering this is the welding someone did on the short radius bends when I got them. Mine actually matches it quite well for sort of quality and consistency, so I'm not too bothered about that. Actually, it kind of all looks the same, so that's quite cool. It's not the greatest stuff in the world, but I had my moments where that one's actually pretty nice. And there's another one hiding. Yeah, this little sort of stitch along here, this was lovely. If I could have done the rest of it like that, that would have been great. But again, it's quite difficult to weld, as I've said before, round pipe and many different directions, but it is what it is. So over the moon with that, and the most important thing is there's decent penetration down inside there. All that's left is to go and try it back on the car, make sure nothing's turned into a banana and no longer fits between the flanges. So let's give this a quick last name. This will be fun one-handed. So the bishop to the actress. Oh, right, so tuck the bottom in, tuck the top in, wedge him in there, and the bottom seems to go in all right. Yeah, still there. Not too shabby. So that all goes in there. Freestanding, hasn't shifted, so we're cool with that. Awesome. Right, so now that's that. I just need to tack this obviously to their respective flanges. Should probably clean the mill scale off that bottom one before I do anything else. But yeah, it's all in there, it all still clears everything. Okay then, so in preparation for welding up the downpipe, I've disconnected the battery. The thing is, when you start welding stuff, you look online and think, well, I knew you had to sort of disconnect the battery perhaps, or just the negative lead, I didn't know. So I had a look online, and there's so much sort of conflicting information. Some people say don't do anything, just put a battery zapper on it, and then some people say that and then some people say that the anti-surge sort of battery things don't do anything, and then leave everything connected because the battery acts as a capacitor, and other people say no, you definitely have to disconnect everything or it will blow up your ECU. So I asked a guy who actually does it, and he told me how he does it. So basically I've disconnected both of the battery terminals, and then I went one step further and disconnected the distributor as well, because inside there's obviously the ignition module, and I know that when I've jump started a Peugeot in the past, I've fried the ignition module just from jump starting it. So I figured, well, I'll disconnect that as well. I've also removed the ECU or disconnected it basically. So the ECU is disconnected because that was connected to my plug and play harness, and obviously now the Det3 is no longer connected to anything there. So the only real consistency in advice that people give is to make sure you put your earth clamp on the piece you're welding. If you're welding an exhaust, put it on the exhaust. So when you're welding, it's a short circuit, so it goes from the torch to the negative clamp, the earth clamp. So if you put the earth clamp on the body and then weld the exhaust, the only way the electricity can get back to earth for the welder is to go through the exhaust, up through the lambda probe, usually through the ECU, which then is probably what fries them. But again, no one really knows, and everyone is convinced that the way they do it is right, and if you do it another way, it won't work. So I'm doing it this way. I don't know if it's right. This is why I've been pooing myself for the past couple of days, and we're just going to zap it, and it's going to be fine. So the lower flange that this goes into is obviously 8mm thick. So what I've done is I've taped this off with a 4mm gap and then marked it up with pen. So obviously won't be able to see how far this is sticking in. So I've got a 4mm mark there, so I know that if I can't see any of this black pen mark, that means I'm far enough in. Hopefully not too far, but too far is better than not enough. And obviously the top goes into a 10mm flange, so that's a 5mm mark. So wedge that in there. So it's all tacked up now. Let's get a light in there. That's where I had the earth clamp when I first started. So I tacked the bottom one first. So I had that on the actual flange itself. The good thing was it didn't have very far to go, obviously, to complete the circuit. So when I was welding, I made sure I also fired the wire into the actual flange first, and then let it sort of pull up onto the actual pipe, because the pipe wasn't earthed and the flange was. The danger is if you fire it into the pipe and it's not touching anything, it's got to find its way to earth. So on the first weld, I fired it into that definitely, just to make sure it completed the circuit. And then obviously once that's joined to that, then everything is joined to that bottom flange. So that's cool.
So I've tacked it in 4 places here. That one around the back was a bit cheeky, so I did all of those. And this bottom one obviously has 3 bolts in it, so I've done 3 tacks on there. They're not in the most strategic of places. I am going to have to trim a couple down, but anyway, once this is fully cooled down, we can then whip it off and then fully weld it on the bench. There's no access to weld it properly here. I mean, I could do the bottom too, but that just seems like too much hassle really. Now it's tacked together, it is what it is. So found one of my old welding gloves and just wrapped that over the pipe there as well, just in case we had any spatter. Didn't fancy it melting through the lower rad hose, so we can retrieve him now. So we've taken all the bolts out now. The exhaust's free of it and it's no longer attached to that, but obviously you've got to check if you've got the clearance here to actually get the thing off without taking the turbo off with it. So hopefully wiggle him this way. Oh yeah, we're clear there. There we go, lovely job, all unhooked. That comes off the bottom. If we look in there, we're about halfway through that plate, which has come out pretty good. Considering we used pen marks, seems to have worked out. Same for the bottom one, about halfway through the flange. Tacks aren't the prettiest, but again, it's like trying to do a handstand whilst holding a torch and do it one-handed under the car kind of thing. So that'll do. Nothing seems to have shifted, so we can now properly weld this. So I think I'll do little one bolted down first, and then probably unbolt him and do the top one outside, because I am going to do both sides, because obviously at the bottom here where the bolts are, I've marked up around the washer and the head. So the problem is I can't actually fully weld this all the way around. As you can see, you can't weld fully all the way around it, because otherwise there'll be no room for the bolt. So that's welded up. Not too bad. I haven't cleaned the spatter off it yet, but still very hot, and if anything's shifted, at least we can have a pretty wacky sculpture we can sell on eBay. I'm sure that's worth a couple of grand easy. So yeah, job's a good one. Leave this to cool down, turn it over, and then we'll do the outside of this bad boy. So it's time to weld the inside of the lower flange on the downpipe, but I need to drill a big hole through the heatsink again so I can weld it from the other side like I did on the manifold, so because I want to bolt it down so it doesn't warp. So these are the 3 holes we're using. So I drew around the gasket. So once the gasket's there, I've drawn around the hole I need to chop out, but obviously we need to find the centre. So through the power of science and some sort of ometry, possibly geometry, so if we pick the outer circle and scribe a line that's 50 across it, and then mark the centre point, which is 25, and then pick another random let's do 40 of it. So again, 40 on there. Then pick our centre point as 20. So now from your centre point, if you take a 90-degree object, and hopefully the end of this ruler is square, I think it's going to make a huge difference really, but we'll put him on there and put him on the 25 mark. You get the rough idea. So somewhere on that line is going to be our centre. And now if we measure across this one, obviously that was 40, so
centre marker 20. Apparently that's our centre, so just trying to close the gap down between the pipe and the actual flange itself, just so there's less of a gap to fill behind it. So it's pretty close now. So we've got the hole now. not a bad job. It's about 61 mil, and as you can see, it's pretty concentric, considering how the whole saw itself was actually a little bit off centre. It jammed twice, nearly sort of giving it the old spaghetti wrist there. So yeah, avoided 2 broken wrists and setting fire to this when all the coolant was getting a bit warm. So yeah, pretty typical interaction with a hole saw, to be perfectly honest with you. So just need to set that centrally and then nip it up. It's not doing too bad actually. There's a bit more clearance than the last one, so we're all welded up now. Had to get a bit creative to get some of the sort of final positions, so I ended up G-clamping it to the table so it didn't sort of like roll around and fall over. Again, same deal as the turbo outlet flange on the manifold, welded it round in quarter sections using, again, we're burning into the side of an 8mm flange and the end of a 1.5mm pipe, so it really didn't need too much power to get it to burn in nice, and like, as I said, you can see it eroding nicely in the through the lens anyway. So well, here goes nothing. Oh, that was a miracle. So that's the finished downpipe. Managed to get a full weld round the top, so there was no need to weld the inside. Obviously a little bit of linish in there just to straighten them up again. And once I'd finished welding the inside of the bottom, needed to grind it out a little bit just to get rid of the lip of the weld that had formed, but generally not too bad. And again, that needed a little linish. It pulled up a little bit on the 3 sort of corners, but that was it, nothing too horrific. So now that's complete, we can move on to the rest of the exhaust. But that'll be coming up on the next episode of Dan91's Garage. Thanks as always for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode.